3.3.1 Using Words Well. Learning Objectives. Discuss how the process of abstraction and the creation of whole messages relate to language clarity. Employ figurative and evocative language. Identify strategies for using language ethically. Have you ever gotten lost because someone gave you directions that didn't make sense to you? Have you ever puzzled over the instructions for how to put something like a bookshelf or grill together? When people don't use words well, there are consequences that range from mild annoyance to legal actions. When people do use words well, they can be inspiring and make us better people. In this section, we will learn how to use words well by using words clearly, using words effectively, and using words ethically. Heading: Using words clearly. The level of clarity with which we speak varies depending on whom we talk to, the situation we're in, and our own intentions and motives. We sometimes make a deliberate effort to speak as clearly as possible. We can indicate this concern for clarity nonverbally by slowing our rate and increasing our volume, or verbally by saying, frankly, or let me be clear. Sometimes it can be difficult to speak clearly. For example, when we are speaking about something with which we are unfamiliar, emotions and distractions can also interfere with our clarity. Being aware of the varying levels of abstraction within language can help us create clearer and more whole messages. Heading: Level of abstraction. The ladder of abstraction is a model used to illustrate how language can range from concrete to abstract. As we follow a concept up the ladder of abstraction, more and more of the essence of the original object is lost or left out, which leaves more room for interpretation, which can lead to misunderstanding. This process of abstracting or leaving things out allows us to communicate more effectively because it serves as shorthand that keeps us from having a completely unmanageable language filled with millions of words, each referring to one specific thing. But it requires us to use context and often other words to generate shared meaning. Some words are more directly related to a concept or idea than others. If I ask you to go take a picture of a book, you could do that. If I ask you to go and take a picture of work, you couldn't, because work is an abstract word that was developed to refer to any number of possibilities, from the act of writing a book to repairing an air conditioner to fertilizing an organic garden. You could take a picture of any of those things, but you can't take a picture of work. 3.3.2. You can see the semanticist S.I. Hayakawa's classic example of the abstraction ladder with Bessie the cow. Ladder of abstraction. At the lowest level, we have something that is very concrete. At this level, we are actually in the moment of experiencing the stimuli that is coming in through our senses. We perceive the actual thing, which is the cow, in front of us, either in person or as an image. This is concrete because it is unmediated, meaning it is actually the moment of experience. As we move up the level, we give the experience a name. We are looking at Bessie. So now, instead of the direct experience with the thing in front of us, we have given the thing a name, which takes us one step away from the direct experience to use a more abstract symbol. Now we can talk and think about Bessie even when we aren't directly experiencing her. At the next level, the word cow now lumps Bessie in with other bovine creatures that share similar characteristics. As we go up the ladder, cow becomes livestock, livestock becomes an asset, and then an asset becomes wealth. Note that it becomes increasingly difficult to define the meaning of the symbol as we go up the ladder, and how with each step we lose more of the characteristics of the original concrete experience. When shared reference are important, we should try to use language that is lower on the ladder of abstraction. Being intentionally concrete is useful when giving directions, for example, and can help prevent misunderstanding. We sometimes intentionally use abstract language. Since abstract language is often unclear or vague, we can use it as a means of testing out a potential topic, like asking a favor, offering negative feedback indirectly to avoid hurting someone's feelings or to hint, or avoiding the specifics of a topic. Heading, definitions, and clarity. Knowing more about the role that abstraction plays in the generation of meaning can help us better describe and define the words we use. As we learned earlier, denotative definitions are those found in the dictionary, the official or agreed upon definition. Since definitions are composed of other words, people who compile dictionaries take for granted that there is a certain amount of familiarity with the words they use to define another word. Otherwise, we would just be going in circles. One challenge we face when defining words is our tendency to go up the ladder of abstraction rather than down. For example, if I ask you to define the word blue, you'd likely say it's a color. If I ask you what a color is, you'd tell me it's a tint or characteristic of the appearance of a particular thing. To define more clearly, by going down the ladder of abstraction, you could say, it's the color of Frank Sinatra's eyes, or it's what the sky looks like on a clear day. People often come to understanding more quickly when a definition is descriptive and or ties into their personal experiences. Definitions aren't useless, but they are usually best when paired with examples. You'll notice that I include many key terms and definitions in this book, but knowing some of the challenges of generating meaning through language, I also include many examples and narratives that come from real life. Jargon refers to specialized words used by a certain group or profession. Since jargon is specialized, it is often difficult to relate to a diverse audience and should therefore be limited when speaking to people from outside the group, or at least be clearly defined when it is used. 3.3.3 Heading, Creating Whole Messages. Earlier, we learned about the 4 types of expressions, which are observations, thoughts, feelings, and needs. Whole messages include all the relevant types of expressions needed to most effectively communicate in a given situation, including what you see, what you think, what you feel, and what you need. Partial messages are missing a relevant type of expression and can lead to misunderstanding and conflict. Whole messages help keep lines of communication open, which can help build solid relationships. On the other hand, people can often figure out a message is partial even if they can't readily identify what is left out. For example, if Roscoe says to Rachel, I don't trust Bob anymore, Rachel may be turned off or angered by Roscoe's conclusion, an expression of thought, about their mutual friend. However, if Roscoe recounted his observation of Bob's behavior, how that behavior made him feel, and what he needs from Rachel in this situation, she will be better able to respond. While partial messages lack relevant expressions needed to clearly communicate, contaminated messages include mixed or misleading expressions. For example, if Alyssa says to her college age daughter, it looks like you wasted another semester, she has contaminated observations, feelings, and thoughts. Although the message appears to be an observation, there are underlying messages that are better brought to the surface. To decontaminate her message and make it more whole and less alienating, Alyssa could more clearly express herself by saying, your dad and I talked, and he said you told him you failed your sociology class and are thinking about changing your major. That's observation. I think you're hurting your chances of graduating on time and getting started on your career. Thought. I feel anxious because you and I are both taking out loans to pay for your education. Feeling. Messages in which needs are contaminated with observations or feelings can be confusing. For example, if Shay says to Dusty, You're so lucky that you don't have to worry about losing your scholarship over this stupid biology final. It seems like he's expressing an observation, but it's really a thought with an underlying feeling and need. To make the message more whole, Shay could bring the need and feeling to the surface. I noticed you did really well in the last exam in our biology class. That's observation. I'm really stressed about the exam next week and the possibility of losing my scholarship if I fail it. That's feeling. Would you be willing to put together a study group with me? Need. More clarity in language is important. But as we already know, communication isn't just about exchanging information. The words we use also influence our emotions and relationships. Heading. Using words effectively. Effective language refers to language used to express a person's feelings and create similar feelings in another person. Effective language can be intentionally used to build relationships in a context or create or enhance interpersonal bonds, and can also be effectively employed in public speaking to engage an audience and motivate them in particular ways. We also use affective language spontaneously and less intentionally. People who speak from the heart connect well with others due to the affective nature of their words. Sometimes people become so filled with emotion that they have to express it, and these exclamations usually arouse emotions in others. Hearing someone exclaim, "I'm so happy," can evoke similar feelings of joy, while hearing someone exclaim, "Why me?" while sobbing conjures up similar feelings of sadness and frustration. There are also specific linguistic devices that facilitate effective communication. 3.3.4 Heading Figurative Language. When people say something is a figure of speech, they are referring to a word or phrase that deviates from expectations in some way in meaning or usage. Figurative language is the result of breaking semantic rules, but in a way that typically enhances meaning or understanding rather than diminishes it. To understand figurative language, a person has to be familiar with the semantic rules of a language and also with social norms and patterns within a cultural and or language group, which makes it difficult for non-native speakers to grasp. Figurative language has the ability to convey much meaning in fewer words because some of the meaning lies in the context of usage, what a listener can imply by the deviation from semantic norms, and in the listener, how the listener makes meaning by connecting the figurative language to his or her personal experience. Some examples of figurative speech include simile, metaphor, and personification. A simile is a direct comparison of two things using the words like or as. Similes can be very explicit for the purpose of conveying a specific meaning and can help increase clarity and lead people to personally connect to a meaning since they have to visualize the comparison in their mind. For example, Forrest Gump's famous simile, "Life is a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get," conjures up feelings of uncertainty and excitement. More direct similes like, "I slept like a baby," and "that bread was hard as a rock," do not necessarily stir the imagination, but still offer an alternative way of expressing something. A metaphor is an implicit comparison of two things that are not alike and or are not typically associated. They become meaningful as people realize the speaker's purpose for relating the two seemingly disparate ideas. Metaphors are figurative devices that can make our writing and speaking richer, but they require a person to balance creative associations among ideas with the common rules of the language if people are expected to figure out the meaning behind the association. A figure a speaker must have the linguistic knowledge and insight to realize when a non literal use of words or ideas will be more meaningful than a literal and conventional use of those words. Metaphors challenge the imagination, which can cause a person to make sense of the metaphor in his or her own way. In 1946, just after World War II ended, Winston Churchill stated the following in a speech: An iron curtain has descended across the continent of Europe. Even though people knew there was no literal heavy metal curtain that had been lowered over Europe, the concepts of iron being strong and impenetrable and curtains being a divider combined to create a stirring and powerful image of a continent divided by the dark events of the previous years. Some communication scholars argue that metaphors serve a much larger purpose and function to structure our human thought processes. The metaphor, time is money, doesn't just represent an imaginative connection, it shapes our social identities. We engage in specific actions that save time, spend time, or waste time because we have been socialized to see time as a resource. Many metaphors spring from our everyday experiences. For example, many objects have been implicitly compared to human body parts. For example, we say a clock has hands and face. Personification refers to the attribution of human qualities or characteristics of other living things to non human objects or abstract concepts. This can be useful when trying to make something abstract more concrete and can create a sense of urgency or realness out of something that is hard for people to conceive. Personification has been used successfully in public awareness campaigns because it allows people to identify with something they think might not be relevant to them. As you can see in the following examples, human papillomavirus is a sleeping enemy that lives in many people and will one day wake up and demand your attention if you do not address it now. Or crystal meth is a stalking your children whether you see it or not. You never know where it's hiding. 3.3.5 Heading Evocative Language. Vivid language captures people's attention and their imagination by conveying emotions and action. Think of the array of mental images that a poem or a well told story from a friend can conjure up. Evocative language can also lead us to have physical reactions. Words like shiver and heartbroken can lead people to remember previous physical sensations related to the word. As a speaker, there may be times when evoking a positive or negative reaction could be beneficial. Evoking a sense of calm could help you talk a friend through troubling health news. Evoking a sense of agitation and anger could help you motivate an audience to action. When we are conversing with a friend or speaking to an audience, we are primarily engaging others' visual and auditory senses. Evocative language can help your conversational partner or audience members feel, smell, or taste something, as well as hear it and see it. Good writers know how to use words effectively and affectively. A well written story, whether it is a book or screenplay, will contain all the previous elements. The rich fantasy worlds conceived in Star Trek, The Lord of the Rings, Twilight, and Harry Potter show the power of figurative and evocative language to capture our attention and our imagination. Some words are so evocative that their usage violates the social norms of appropriate conversations. Although we could use such words to intentionally shock people, we can also use euphemisms or less evocative synonyms for or indirect references to words or ideas that are deemed inappropriate to discuss directly. We have many euphemisms for things like excretory acts, sex, and death. While euphemisms can be socially useful and creative, they can also lead to misunderstanding and problems in cases where more direct communication is warranted, despite social conventions. Here are some ideas on how to use words well. This chapter discusses several playful, creative, and engaging aspects of verbal communication. Employing language in an engaging way requires some effort for most people in terms of learning the rules of a language system, practicing, and expanding your vocabulary and expressive repertoire. Only milliseconds pass before a thought is verbalized and out there in the world. Since we've already learned that we can be held accountable for the short and long term effects of our communication, we know being able to monitor our verbal communication and follow the old adage to think before we speak is an asset. Using language for effect is difficult. but it can make your speech unique, whether it is a conversation or in front of a larger audience. Aside from communicating ideas, speech also gives lasting impressions. The following are some tips for using words well that can apply to various settings, but may be particularly useful in situations where one person is trying to engage the attention of an audience. Use concrete words to make new concepts or ideas relevant to the experience of your listeners. Use an appropriate level of vocabulary. It is usually obvious when people are trying to speak at a level that is out of their comfort zone, which can hurt credibility. Avoid public speeches that are too rigid and unnatural. Even though public speaking is more formal than conversation, it is usually okay to use contractions and personal pronouns. Not doing so would make the speech awkward and difficult to deliver, since it is not a typical way of speaking. Avoid bloating your language by using unnecessary words. Don't say, it is ever apparent, when you can say just, it's clear. Use vivid words to paint mental images for your listeners. Take them to places outside the immediate setting through the rich description. Use repetition to emphasize key ideas. When giving a formal speech that you have time to prepare for, record your speech and listen to your words. Have your outline with you and take note of areas that seem too bland, bloated, or confusing, and then edit them before you deliver the speech. 3.3.7 Heading Swearing. Scholars have identified two main types of swearing: social swearing and annoyance swearing. People engage in social swearing to create social bonds or for impression management, to seem cool or attractive. This type of swearing is typically viewed as male dominated, but some research studies have shown that the differences in frequency and use of swearing by men and women aren't as vast as perceived. Nevertheless, there is generally more of a social taboo against women swearing than men. But as you already know, communication is contextual. Annoyance swearing provides a sense of relief, as people use it to manage stress and tension, which can be a preferred alternative to physical aggression. In some cases, swearing can be cathartic, allowing a person to release emotions that might otherwise lead to more aggressive or violent actions. In the past few decades, the amount of profanity used in regular conversations and on television shows and movies has increased. This rise has been connected to a variety of factors, including increasing social informality since the 1960s and a decrease in the centrality of traditional conservative religious views in many Western cultures. As a result of these changes, the shock value that swearing once had is lessening, and this desensitization has contributed to its spread. You have probably even noticed in your lifetime that the amount of swearing on television has increased. And in June of 2012, the Supreme Court stripped the Federal Communications Commission of some of its authority to fine broadcasters for obscenities. There has also been a reaction or backlash to this spread, which is most publicly evidenced by the website, book, and other materials produced by the Cuss Control Academy. Although swearing is often viewed as negative and uncivil, some scholars argue for its positive effects. Specifically, swearing can help people to better express their feelings and to develop social bonds. In fact, swearing is typically associated more with the emotional part of the brain than the verbal part of the brain, as evidenced by people who suffer trauma to the verbal part of the brain and lose all other language function but are still able to swear. Heading Accountability. The complexity of our verbal language system allows us to present inferences as facts and mask judgments within seemingly objective or oblique language. As an ethical speaker and a critical listener, it is important to be able to distinguish between facts, inferences, and judgments. Inferences are conclusions based on thoughts or speculation, but not direct observation. Facts and conclusions based on direct observation are group consensus. Judgments are expressions of approval or disapproval that are subjective and are not verifiable. Linguists have noted that a frequent source of miscommunication is inference observation confusion, or the misperception of an inference conclusion based on limited information. As an observation, an observed or agreed upon fact, We can see the possibility for such confusion in the following example. If a student posts on a professor rating site the statement, "This professor grades unfairly and plays favorites," then they are presenting an inference and a judgment that could easily be interpreted as a fact. Using some of the strategies discussed earlier for speaking clearly can help present information in a more ethical way. For example, by using concrete and descriptive language and owning emotions and thoughts through the use of I language. To help clarify the message and be more accountable, the student could say, "I worked for 3 days straight on my final paper and only got a C," which we will assume is a statement of fact. This could then be followed up with, "But my friend told me she only worked on hers the day before it was due, and she got an A. I think that's unfair, and I feel like my efforts aren't recognized by the professor." Of the last two statements, the first states what may be a fact. Note, however, that the information is secondhand rather than directly observed. And the second states an inferred conclusion and expresses an owned thought and feeling. Sometimes people don't want to mark their statements as inferences because they want to believe them as facts. In this case, the student may have attributed her grade to the professor's unfairness to cover up or avoid thoughts that her friend may be a better student in this subject area, a better writer, or a better student in general. Distinguishing between facts, inferences, and judgments, however, allows your listeners to better understand your message and judge the merits of it, which makes us more accountable and therefore more ethical speakers.